into the Capernaum. So, anything you saw in any of the
trying to
apologetics?
get the stream working it kind of drained me. Yeah, I mean, there hasn't. I mean, there have been a couple of topics on the Warzone that have been interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, we've been covered the Summa Contra Gregorium, and very hard to say that was.
Like almost all of it's way over half of it is basically fraudulent quotations, interpolations.
Can you give me 1 second, Father? I thought it was like 70%. Message. Hold on. Okay, where did Father Enoch go? He just disappeared into serious debate. Father? Oh. So it looks like we might be live and having here. So we're back to live. Father, if you want to come back into the stream room, if you can fix the microphone, helpful. Hold on. Let me just quickly see.
Can you hear me?
Hear you fine.
I don't know. I don't know what room to go into. So.
Oh yeah, just stay in the stream room because the stream room
is the limited. Stream room? What is it called? Debate. I see questions, serious debate, and casual.
I just put you in the stream room.
Oh, I am. Okay.
Let's see here. Hold on, because it looks like we may have gone live on YouTube. So hold on. 1 second. We're gonna have a very late starting show. Yeah, it looks like here. Give me 1 second. What's going on? So we are live on YouTube. Let me just send a quick link. It is blank, yes. And I'm not sure why, but that's okay. Anyone won't watch this is for our faces anyway. Can you hear me, Father?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm putting the link here. I'm going to put this the Discord, and I'm also going to in the other in Facebook so that there's ways to reach out. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Discord. So that's we spent some time talking about modernity, and let me see here. Father, I just got to shut one thing off. Okay. So a lot of information was kind of, I think, missed because we just started here, and so I'm putting a link up late night for the next hour or so, I'm guessing, and then we'll.
I guess we can go for an hour. That we can talk for an hour.
Absolutely, and so look here, and going back to Discord then. Hey, there's a couple of people in the casual. Do you want to bring them in, or it's Verum and Sean? I don't know if you want to.
Let's just take questions. I'm better at reacting to questions or discussions.
As questions, either you can put them in the YouTube, you can put them in the in YouTube or in Discord, Facebook, and we're willing to answer your apologetics questions. I should mention, I believe it's, I don't know if I mentioned this on the show, on October 19th, I'll be debating William Albrecht. to do that on our show. Apparently, he wanted to do it on Reason and Theology. I said okay.
So who is this fellow?
Roman Catholic apologist. So we finally have a Roman Catholic apologist willing to actually, but he wants to do more of a formal debate, and he wants to do Immaculate Conception, ancient and biblical. So that should be interesting. I'm not exactly sure where his argument's going to come from, but it should
going to bring a lot of some.
I know the quotes, but none of them say exactly what he's trying to say. So
like it's not it might lead to it if you take it 4 or 5 steps down the road.
Be a radical, right? Exactly, and that's my point. You have to always use some sort of human logical derivation.
I mean, even if they say something, even if they hypothetically say something like, "The Virgin was born without original sin."
It's not the
technically,
same thing.
Yeah, because you have some fathers to say Saint John the Baptist was born without original sin because he was filled with the Holy Ghost from his mother's womb. That's not the same as they were conceived in a state where they had a pure soul.
Exactly, and when you get right down to it, in the history of the terms Immaculate Conception, it's all post-schism. And it was even hotly debated in the 12th and 13th centuries. It's not until the 14th and 15th century in Roman Catholicism where they start talking about it as a fait complete. So the idea that
it wasn't made an official dogma in Roman Catholicism until like 1848. That
1854. But that says right there, very premise, ancient and biblical. I mean, I'm curious. Maybe he's got some sources I've never seen. I doubt it, but
he'll probably quotes some old believer statement from 1685 that they take to mean the Immaculate. I mean, I don't know why the old believers are some authority, but
that's really the best you can do, because I have.
There is something where there was like some brotherhood that had been a Uniate brotherhood that was taken into Orthodoxy. Like, or they were saying something like Peter Mogila, member of the Brotherhood of the Immaculate Heart in Paris.
Yeah, but if Peter Mogila said that, Lev Gillette would have been all over it. He tries to get the very poor and tendentious links to Orthodox veneration of this alleged Immaculate Conception, and none of them are very good. So I can't imagine if a trained, I hate to say it, if a trained Vatican spy, if that's the best he can pull up, I'm not worried. So I think that it should be an interesting time, though.
Probably try to bring St. Gregory Palamas. It's everything. Okay, so I thought there was something interesting that Father Tikhon Kazushin made the point about how back with each other. How to determine when something becomes heretical, when not. And I'll read the post he made because I think it's just worth at least talking about for a little bit. He says, "Brethren, may I present the following topic discussion here. Controversy among Orthodox, especially the true Orthodox, as to when, at what point in time, jurisdiction or group, heretical and out of the church, or even devoid of grace. I understand there is no straightforward recipe for such a declaration to be valid and acceptable. But may I suggest a simple procedure for assuring that such statement will be valid without having recourse to the so-called... There should be 2 steps in general. 1, first, the ecclesiastical body that considers itself to be right should write a letter of admonition to their erring brethren, indicating their errors or eventually downright heresies. If the heretics do not respond and persist with their errors, then only one way remains by which we may know they have strayed far and wide. Wait until they convene their own council or synod and see if they reject their fallacies at their synod or not. If they don't, full justification to call them anathema and pray for them as straying heretics. The gist of this approach is to let the heretics turn the switch themselves and have justification." I think it's a good idea. I mean, I made a comment on the other group I minister, where I was kind of pessimistic about how people would actually take the suggestion. I wasn't trying to attack the suggestion. I think it's a very good one. But generally, I've seen a lot of pessimistic, people write to others in kind of a sarcastic way, and they don't really have an intention of helping. But I guess this is presuming, actual very good sincerity, I guess you could say, on one party's part.
Presuming sincerity more than anything else. And that's something that... Now, I tend to think that this would be more of an applicable thing to about, jurisdictions, because I mean, true Orthodox jurisdictions, there's so much infighting, and it
Well,
has.
this really applies to people who have communion agreements among themselves. I mean, if like you're not in communion with somebody, this is probably not going to work out to begin with. Communion with another true Orthodox jurisdiction, and there's some sort of issues.
Well, yeah,
this.
something.
Yes. So go ahead.
I was going to say something like that happened with us.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of follow this procedure, and it kind of union with our sister synods ended for about 2 years, 2.5 years, or 3 years or so. But it maybe a little bit under 3 years, and then it kind of gradually got repaired through negotiations in the meantime. Still theoretically on all parts, and eventually it prevailed. How things will work out if you have positive will. When
we're talking about, like, say, for example, the World Orthodox bodies, been followed. This procedure was basically followed by the Old Calendarists in Greece in the 1930s and by the True Orthodox in Russia in the 30s and 40s. There's not really that line hasn't been drawn. Whether certain synods, etc., applied that line. Ultimately, that's.
I mean, it would. I mean, if I wrote a letter to the old believers, that would have no effect. I can tell you that. I mean, so but I wouldn't consider them to be Orthodox anyway. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was a very good suggestion. So just
it was. I thought it was very solid. I think Sean in YouTube, yeah, you're right. It did seem like he was talking about World Orthodox bodies, and we did our best.
The T-Con actually mentions True Orthodoxy in the post.
Oh, okay. So he's talking about between True Orthodox bodies. Now, I think like the only example I can think of recent memory where that would apply is probably the Hakna. So
Well, there are some other recent cases. For example, there's the ongoing. I don't hate to get into this situation, like controversy between the Artok and their Serbian sister synod.
Interestingly, somebody just asked, "What is your opinion on the Remnant Rokor blog on YouTube?"
YouTube. I didn't know they had something on YouTube.
Channel is active right now, Father. So somebody asked, "What is your opinion on the Remnant Rokor blog?" Well, I think insofar as they attack, like Sergianism and so on and so forth, they have a lot of personal attacks towards everyone they disagree with. They're convinced I'm a narcissist, and that's good for my soul, I guess, to continually remind myself of sin. But, they have downloaded a lot of useful books and stuff. For partisanism, there's some useful resources there, so I say go for it. That's that.
And
what else have we got here? Stuff. Now we can go to the goodies in the war zone. Let's see here. Okay, somebody's attacking reception of councils. I don't understand how this is a thing. I'm really fascinated by this. It seems that reception of councils, and that's always tied to the consensus patrum. It seems that they really, really have a big problem with it, even though they can't argue against it. And I think that's because it scares them. I think the idea that the church actually has methods in place to determine, whether something's true or not is a big deal. And it terrifies the heck out of, especially Roman Catholics who like believing that they have, their oracle in Rome or that he's dead and has to be replaced, sometime in the next 40 years. But the point is, the fathers are very clear that the deposit of faith, which came from the apostles, is being preserved through the church. It's not, it's not preserved through an oracle. It's not preserved, through development of doctrine. It's, et cetera. It's just our job is to protect the faith and to serve the faith and to, live the faith, not to or keep writing it. And I think that bothers people.
Well, it's also pretty evident that the papacy is what determines an ecumenical council does not fit with history.
No, it doesn't hold water at all.
It doesn't hold with water. For example, a famous example is the 649 Lateran Synod, which I accept as an Orthodox Synod. Obviously, it was Orthodox Synod in the year 649 that condemned monothelitism in a very formal way as a heresy. But if you look at the first part of the Acts of the Synod, Pope St. Martin and the bishops are declaring it in the most explicit terms by like the authority of the Roman Church, etc., to be an ecumenical council. It was never accepted as an ecumenical council. For
That's
example,
true, and that one I think scares the RCs more because they're so used to dealing with attempting to prove.
That's a case where like the Pope was actually at something he thought was an
Affirmatively
ecumenical
trying
council.
to make it. Yeah, they're trying to make an ecumenical council and fail.
I mean, it's accepted as like an authoritative council in that it condemned the heresies of monothelitism and monoenergism. But that doesn't. But just because there's an Orthodox council that is considered, condemning a heresy, that doesn't itself make it an ecumenical council. For example, that if you look in the case of Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, it wasn't really into the 12th, 13th, and 14th century that they finally began to number the Seventh Ecumenical Council as technically ecumenical. Now they accepted it. For a long time was that this is some council Constantinople held because that was how they were getting back into the church. And Saint Photius even talks about this when he calls the 879 council, which is, I really argue, the Eighth Ecumenical Council. He's like, well, technically Antioch and Jerusalem, Alexandria, won't call ecumenical, so we're going to ask them they represent and to it, but they can Antioch and just number it. It didn't mean they have their own council. Awesome. So, I mean, even on the eighth ecumenical council, weren't numbering the Seventh Ecumenical Council as seventh, even though they actually the doctrinal icons and such. Think of the case of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. I mean, you did have the Istrian schismatics, that's true, who broke from everybody because they didn't want to exclude. You had parts of the church that for a long time did not want to call the Fifth Ecumenical Council ecumenical, even though they agreed with his decrees, because they didn't like the way the Emperor Justinian had supposedly ill-treated Pope Vigilius. Once all those people were dead, no one really had an objection, from ecumenical.
So, colorful question. Rambles asks, any obscure Orthodox Western saints that you believe should be more popular?
Saint Tiburtius.
Who?
Tiburtius.
Okay, I didn't hear you said that.
Tiburtius. Martyr who reposed in the end of the Diocletian persecution. He was beheaded. We have several inscriptions in Rome from the 370s or so, or 380s, by Pope St. Damasus. See, Pope St. Damasus actually had a lot of information about St. Tiburtius because when he was, I think, either a deacon or a priest, a man who was an old man by the time, who had beheaded St. Tiburtius during the Diocletian persecution. The executioner had repented and become Orthodox. And so there are various epitaphs commemorating the martyrdom of St. Tiburtius. We commemorated him last week. Saint Hippolytus, Saint Hippolytus, the soldier martyr, and his 19 companions, who are commemorated this Monday. Now, this is not the Hiero martyr, Saint Hippolytus, but this is a Roman soldier. 3 days after Saint Lawrence, Saint Hippolytus had originally been the Roman soldier that was tasked with guarding Saint Lawrence, and he was converted by Saint Lawrence in prison, and then he went and converted his own household, and they were all brought before Dacius Caesar and then Valerian the prefect, and they were all basically tortured to death and then executed, or tortured and executed 3 days later. So I think some of the Roman martyrs I think are really important. Obscure, I think maybe they mean like some later figures, like in the 500s or 600s. I guess maybe that's.
Well, I think that I feel it's kind of a strange question because every local calendar venerates their saints. I would suggest reading things like the Vita Patrum, know more about your Orthodox Western heritage. I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I personally think that it's important. But you'd
You
be
can
surprised.
find Father Seraphim Rose's translation of a French edition of the Vita of Saint Gregory of Tours Vita Patrum, like free online somewhere. I think it might be
Yeah.
in the Internet Archive or something like that, PDF format. I mean, you can order. There's other books like the book, the Glory of the Confessors and the Glory of the Martyrs, which are the kind of complementary books of Saint Gregory of Tours. I have them on my bookshelf right here. To the Life of the Fathers.
Also, the Passionary of Evlogius of Cordoba. Do more of them. So there's quite a.
Is there a Spanish edition of that?
There is a Spanish edition of it. I'm not sure about an English edition, but the point
the only English edition you got to buy from is Richard Price translated. It's like $130. You got it. So,
boy,
be buying that for some time. Most people aren't. But I see Evlogius of Cordoba. He was the Cordoban martyrs. That's especially important because of the Muslim persecutions, which do continue. Ramble says, "What do you think about the story of Saint George killing the dragon? Was the dragon a demon, an actual creature, or allegory?" As I recall, the dragon, the creature, eating like maidens. I mean, which tells me if it was I don't think it could be I mean, I think there's no reason it couldn't be. I might be giving mixed message here, but I think something can actually be a physical, real creature, but also be influenced by the demonic and also be an allegory for something else. It can also have some sort of symbolic interpretation.
So your answer is yes.
Yeah, I think it's all. Why not demonic, an actual creature, and an allegory? Why not? I mean, for example, the devil could. I mean, this is this actual discussion. Basil or maybe a few other fathers about about act in the physical world. For example, there was the discussion you have in some of the fathers about how some of the fathers seem to believe. I wrote an article about this as part of an NFTU years back. That many of the fathers have the view. Basil talks about this somewhere. I know Saint Isidore does. That the demons can, if God allows them. The demons can interact with physical matter to such an extent that they can assemble kind of like puppetery bodies. They can take, it's not really a real creation, but it's like taking matter and assembling something and puppet it. And that's kind of the explanation in some of the patristic literature for the night hag that attacks people in the night and such. So yeah, I think it's all three. I see no reason, and of course, I mean Saint George slaying it. He slays it, and that's an allegory. I mean, or manifestation in symbolic sense. There's the physical killing of the dragon, but that symbolizes, how people can trample on the devil to our Lord Jesus Christ.
I mean, I think it goes without saying that the idea of creatures is not a possibility. I mean,
you can have a crocodile that's 20 foot long.
Yeah, exactly, and we have are referred to as dragons, and they just happen to be small. Now, if you just make a much bigger one, then there you go.
I mean, and by the way, how do we know this was not like some kind of a dinosaur creature that survived the flood? I mean, not survived the flood, but I don't say survived the flood, but a dinosaur creature that was like on the ark as a baby, and then like they went extinct, and then there was some of them survived. So I mean, nothing survived the flood that wasn't on the ark, but I mean that could be the case too. So.
Somebody asked, could the rhythm be brought into the casual voice chat? And I'm just going to respond, I doubt that works. In any case, so let's see here. Sounds creepy. Yeah, well.
That sounds creepy.
Hag.
I don't. What was the context?
You had mentioned the night hag.
The night hag. You find that in some lives and some in patristic literature. It's called the succubus or something like that.
Oh, so a female demon.
It's not the father like Saint Basil is not. It takes the form of a female. It's not really female. If you read in some of the anyway, but I think Saint Isidore mentions that that's talked about in various figures, the night hag and such. I mean, later Jewish folklore is like, oh, this was the night hag. All the night hags come from Lilith, who was like the first wife of Adam. That's like this Talmudic mythology they get from like Babylon and such like that. But that's not true. But the demons can take either. Now, this is something interesting. And again, I guess I'd have to pull up that article on NFQ I wrote like 4 or 5 years ago about the fathers and their opinions about magic and demons and how they interact. General patristic view that I gather is that they viewed magic as mostly illusory in this, not that there weren't demonic occurrences, but that the demons really could, unless God allowed them to do more, could only generate almost what we might call demonic holograms. For example, you have like Saint Boniface and some of his letters, or some of the canons he passed in some of the councils in Germany in the 730s and 40s, where he talks about that they're riding on brooms and sticks and flying around the mountains, that not believe it was really happening. He felt like the demons were like deceiving people to see these things, or they were making people go crazy. They some of them have viewed the matter like that the demons could generate kind of like almost false images. It's like we find that in some of the Desert Fathers, where they're supposedly an angel will appear to one father, Saint Pachomius or some other Desert Father, and it will look like it's talk and all the rest. And as soon as let's say Saint Pachomius or one of the other fathers will make the sign of the cross, it just disintegrates. So that's discussion about how did demons assemble physical matter? Could they do that? And the conclusion seems to be that if God allows them to, they could, but that demons are kind of restricted in what they can do. If you look in the book of Job, Satan's able to physically do a lot of harm to Job because God allows him to.
Right. But yeah,
he's able to physically do bad disease and all this terrible stuff. And in exorcism prayers and blessings and in the church service books, there are prayers against demonic attacks and weather and all these evil things that the demons could. This can only be done with God's permission, because obviously, if God simply just said the demons can do whatever they want, they'd be like quakes and
they'd be causing damage left and right.
With fallen angels was an immensely powerful creature on its own, them running havoc and amok, and throughout the entire universe. So they're restricted in what they can do. I believe they're even simply restricted on the planet Earth. And so but if you look at life of Saint Anthony the Great, he talks about how the demons, for all their great powers, they are completely annulled when someone makes the sign of the cross. They're terrified of the sign of the cross. So even these creatures that supposedly have all these great powers and such. In fact, if you one of the on a related subject, one of the things they sound like Saint Basil and Saint Isidore, Saint Augustine, and Saint Augustine addresses some of this in the City of God, which has a lot of great discussions in it, and he kind of assembles the previous thought of other North African fathers and some other fathers he had read. Question people had is, how is it that the oracles of Delphi and all these pagan oracles could supposedly predict earthquakes and disasters? One St. Augustine's like, well, maybe they're just lying and they just get lucky, not lucky. Maybe they're just guessing, I should say. But the other is, in fact, a rather natural explanation that demons can travel a lot faster than humans can. So if a demon sees an earthquake, let's say an earthquake happened in Antioch, 3 p.m., the demon can simply just fly 30 seconds, however fast they can travel, but it's really fast, apparently, and or an earthquake is happening, predict an earthquake, and then the oracle says it, and then people they find out a few days later, oh, this great earthquake happened in Antioch, and they're like, oh, well, the oracle predicted this or something like that. So the other explanation St. Augustine and some other fathers give is that demons can physically look into the physical interaction of St. Augustine and other fathers would attribute earthquakes a lot of times to caverns where water was, and they would collapse and they'd reform. It's not actually approximating our understanding of the tectonic plate, so it's not technically accurate. But the view is that, the demons as fallen angels could see into the earth and could predict, oh, this is going to happen. And so but that would be no more than more them predicting the future in any real sense than if I had a sophisticated earthquake machine and I could say, well, the tectonic plates are moving in this direction and there's a 99.9995% chance an earthquake is going to happen. That's just, using kind of technology or kind of powers inherent in their ability to see into the earth or whatever. But back to St. George, I see no reason they could not either, if God so permitted, influence or control, possess. I mean, for example, demons were sent in, and when Christ
Put them into a herd of pigs.
I mean, they made the pigs go mad to rush into a lake and drown. So exactly. I mean, so demons can possess animals, and that's exactly. I see no reason they can't. If they didn't want to assimilate the body, they can possess an animal. So.
Rambles asks on YouTube, doesn't the night hag rape men or something? To my knowledge, most of the legends around the night hag have to do with sleep paralysis. I haven't.
Somewhere in St. Basil, he deals with this. I mean, I don't really have my stuff in front of me, but I believe there's. I'll have to put in the show notes the article I wrote on NFT where it kind of addresses this. And the concept is the night hag. The demons try to induce people to have nocturnal illusions and such. This is talked about in some of the prayers for cleansing the church, because they want to try to tempt people. They want to try to ruin their lives. They want to try to do a lot of terrible things to people. So behind influencing people to do all kinds of evil things.
Doodle Bob asks, I have a few different true Orthodox parishes I'm considering visiting. A Roac Church, a GOC Hatka, Michigan, and a Genuine Orthodox Church of America in these parishes. Well, one, the Roac and Greek are going to most likely be Russian and Greek, respectively. GOCA, I'm assuming that's Gregory of Colorado's. I don't recommend doing that. The others are just going to be churches. I mean,
did they mention Hatka?
Hatka.
Did they say Hatka in the question?
No. They said GOC Hatka. Metropolitan Demetrius. The main difference is that one is probably going to be Greek, but past that, it's not that big a difference. Don't trust anything from Gregory of Colorado, so I would just leave. Other than that, I mean, that's what other stuff is there? Let's see. Is there? So we go to the war zone. I realize that even though the title talks about Switch and robot religion, we actually discussed those before the thing went live. So I'm going to change the title of this later on. Talk about it in more detail some other time. But and Sean wrote Hatka is GOCK. We are either Greek or English. Yeah, that's basically it. And so that, I mean, the Roac, that's under Metropolitan Theodore of Suzdal. Good people. And again, the GOCA is basically schismatic from everyone. Anyone except themselves, and their own canonicity is questionable.
Colorado, you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So that's the main thing. Again, it's Fox parishes throughout the country. Christ Father says, do we have any pre-Nicene writings on venerations of icons? Some say pre-Nicene fathers condemned iconography. Did Eusebius write the tradition of Luke painting the icon of the Virgin Mary? Eusebius was a historian, so he would have copied down the tradition. He wouldn't have made that up. Then as for pre-Nicene fathers condemning iconography, I don't believe that that's the case. You have some that are usually taken out of context, like the Synod of Elvira.
Generally, it's condemning idolatry.
But if you look at the Dura Europos Church and synagogue, I mean, iconography was common. You see it in the catacombs in the Roman catacombs.
The same quotes people bring up to find in the others to supposedly condemn icons are the same ones. Some of them they used to try to bring these up to condemn altars and priesthood. By the way, the words they used for altars are actually words at the time that generically meant altar. in the 4th and 5th century, once paganism derided, there were like terms like ara, denoted like an altar of like physical blood sacrifice and such. But then again, if you look in, let's say, Saint Cyprian of Carthage, Saint Irenaeus of Lyons, they talk about the table of the Eucharist on which the sacrifice and oblation is offered. Altar. All right. So you have to look at the context. For example, some of the quotations they'll try to bring up from the pre-Nicene fathers to condemn images as a whole, or to condemn the concept of altars or whatever. They're quoting actually. What they're trying to say is that, oh, in the New Testament we don't have this. In the modern period, we'll try to say. But the patristic quotations they're giving are generally from like Isaiah or Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Or the Lord was saying to the prophet, I hate, your new moon festivals and your feasts and your sacrifices, etc. But God did not, after saying those things, condemn the temple, though. Many of these are out of context quotations. People don't understand what the fathers are trying to say. God in these quotations or in the prophets is trying to say that people who offer sacrifice or go to services with kind of a very dead heart is just mechanistic. That's not pleasing to God. 15 discovered that. But that's not, for example, when Solomon dedicated the temple, as I recall, he said something like, it's not that, your glory can be contained into a house, but it's we build a temple for the purpose of a place to worship God. All right. And it's God's presence that sanctifies it, not the temple. It's God's presence that sanctifies the temple or the church, not the building that makes God holy.
So I hope that answers your question. Christ follower Reverend Britt says the GOC is under Demetrius and they're Russian Rite. If they are Russian Rite, that's an exception because the GOC-K is largely a Greek church. Let me think here. What else do we have going on here? That's good. It's good though that the person asking has a bunch of, at least 2 TOCs near him, which is very rare. We need to build more missions as always, and I think that that's a big thing that needs to be taken care of. It's starting from ground zero, ecumenism having destroyed everything. As I've probably mentioned at least a dozen times on this show, East Pennsylvania, where you see a lot of churches, some established before the revolution, and a lot of them are even just kind of empty. And it's because ecumenism kills faith. So it's a question of restoring faith to the people. Demographically, of just getting a bunch of Orthodox kids isn't working, especially if you're not teaching them the faith properly.
I'd also like to make in concert with that, there was something I saw on someone's Facebook news stream, or however they do this, like news stream of Facebook, where stuff, people post stuff and you can see it, I guess. But it was a video to a Serbian patriarchate or commander giving a sermon. It was kind of meant to be a joke, and people were like, oh, this is a serious man. He may have been a serious man, but anyway, he's like supposedly telling a story where someone says, and someone asked me, Father, and at which point I said, do you want me to hit you? But is that really the proper response? It's kind of folksy, like, oh, that's a Serbian priest, ha ha ha.
I was going to say, you can see that, for example, and that's where the kind of turns into a folksy thing. Like you'll see in some of the writings of even the Desert Fathers, where you'll see somebody asking a question, but it's usually out of pride, like just an honest, simple question, and then somebody will say something to the effect of, well, the answer is a slap. A person asking, why do we fast? That's a basic question about Orthodox life. Like, we literally do that all the time. So for him to give an answer like that, you off, Father Enoch, but it's disgusting. Disgusting because of the fact that it encourages this no-thought mentality that I guess really ecumenism has helped. It's dumbified orthodoxy. It's made it retarded.
I agree with that, but I think there is stuff that happened prior to ecumenism where, if You look in a country like Serbia or Greece back in the 19th century, it seems that what you're dealing with is a situation where they didn't really have to. I mean, frankly, they didn't have to compete with anybody. Everybody was Orthodox, unless they were like some German or Italian, colonies or whatever, So in it, they had nothing. None of the Enlightenment thing. I mean, a lot of this stuff wasn't really coming in, except to maybe the really, really educated or elite class, and so the priests didn't necessarily. You might say they glided by. There was ecclesiastical inertia, if you know what I'm talking about, Father, where people didn't have to think about much more complicated questions. If you don't improve, if you just kind of stay in that state, that status, what's going to happen when the villagers start to meet people from the local university and they're challenging everything about orthodoxy.
Exactly.
Can either respond and say, well, or I don't, and they can tell their children don't listen to them. But then eventually, if they keep on telling their children don't listen to them or don't, and they have no real answer other than it's what the priest says, like at a point where people are going to be like, orthodoxy doesn't have any answers. So,
Sean asks, for those people who are alone, how can you describe how one would start a mission? How do we go from prayer room to chapel to parish? You start with people who know their faith and who are willing to live it. Kind of overly simplistic. You have to, and not everyone is meant to start a mission. Some people are meant to drive 3 hours to to a vigil and go to liturgy the next day. But start with doing the prayers, doing the services. It's ultimately a priest can celebrate a wide variety of circumstances, from a prayer room to a chapel to a parish. That's what the antimension is useful for. So the real question is, how many people do you plan to reach out with orthodoxy? Where it really comes down to is, thinking about doing reader services, just start doing them. Sing from your bishop. It's really not that simple. It's not more complicated than that. But the temptations are incredible, but the rewards are well.
And if you want to start a mission, I guess if you want us to be a formal mission, bishop for that. But you can still do, you can still read prayers in your home and sing the Typica, even if you don't have a formal mission and you can't get to church. So, but hopefully that turns into something else. I mean, if you're wealthy enough, you can build a church building. Maybe rely on the kind of principle of if you build it, they will come. I mean, you have everything ready for you, but then you need to get a priest there.
A lot of people have done that, and it's not always the most successful method to start with the people, then build the building. But that's just, I don't know, that's just me.
It could work sometimes. I'm just saying.
Yeah. It depends. It just depends on your circumstances. You start with people who are committed to the Orthodox faith.
Rambles asks a question. I think this was asked at the beginning, but we weren't being broadcast on YouTube at the time. And he says, many Protestants say that Luke 11:27-28 debunks the Orthodox practice of the veneration of the Virgin Mary. How would you respond? I'd say no. Our Lord is saying that more blessed are those who hear. That's more blessed. It's more blessed to hear the word of God to keep it than to have breastfed Christ. One literal sense, lady was the mother of the Word incarnate. So she literally took the Word of God and kept it. If you look at some of the icons of the Theotokos, the Annunciation, there's like this beam of ray going into her ear from the sky. I don't know if you've ever seen those in some icons. The other point is that our Lord is saying, first off, Our Lady's, just because she gave birth to Christ, she still had to have faith in her son. It wasn't a situation where she had no free will and she just couldn't turn away from our Lord if she had wanted to. So obviously, Our Lady was an example of somebody who was obedient, who was God. She kept the word of God both in a physical sense of the incarnate word, and she obeyed our Lord. Her example of her humility is an example, my soul doth magnify the Lord, and all generations shall call me blessed. So I see no. I think it's people are reading into Luke 11:27-28 in the context of the debates in the Reformation, and then even after that to try to, I guess, destroy the traditional Christian practice of veneration of the Virgin. I just think people have to be taught is that interpretation of it to look at it like that.
Do you recommend studying theology at a master's level for a layperson, Orthodox school, perhaps?
There are no. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't recommend studying
answer,
theology at a master's level for clergy. Most of the theological schools that are out there ruin people's minds. The best thing to do is to study the church fathers. As long as you have some critical thinking apparatus there, be fine. It's the best sources of Orthodox teaching will always be the church fathers. Discussed with another radio show, so on and so forth. Have all this theological education, and the truth is theology, the love of God. For St. Gregory the theologian, the fact that he got 4 degrees from Yale, he was intimately connected with God. Theology is connection with God, and I think people who study academic quote-unquote theology, studying true theology at all.
Look at the so-called quote-unquote Orthodox seminaries in the United States, for example. I mean, if you're going to go into St. Vladimir's and it'll come out like twice the son of hell as you were before. I don't see any of these groups that say they're seminaries that actually produce anything that's positive. They may produce people with an academic degree, and they learn some Greek, and but you can go to Vladimir's and get a degree in medieval Greek, church fathers in their original Koine, or whatever they're
the closest you can get to anything solid in terms of theological education in world Orthodoxy, and this is a real stretch, is probably St. Tikhon's, only because of the fact that they actually have a monastic cycle of services. The truth of the matter is,
maybe Jordanville in terms of world Orthodoxy.
But does Jordanville even offer proper degrees? I don't even think they do.
I mean, and then again, with the Moscow Patriarch and stuff coming in, I mean, I don't really know, because even St. Tikhon's, we got to be careful, because we don't exactly know what they're also teaching. So I mean, there was intra-Orthodoxy in America. There was, I think, the GOCK does have some sort of seminary up in Washington State or California.
Is it active again?
I don't know. I think they have some sort. So I mean, one could just, I don't know I don't know the whole situation with that.
Let me.
I think we discussed this on a program previously. People study theology, the teachings of the church, was they went to church services. They had a spiritual father, and they were under the tutelage of other priests and learned clergy and the bishop, and they read the fathers, and they went to the divine services, and they prayed, and they discussed these things, and there was a level of advancement over time. I still think that's kind of the best way, and if anybody does have a seminary, if you follow that method, that's probably the best method in an Orthodox sense to teach a person. A building and a seminary, and you're going through that method of teaching them the Holy Fathers, their commentaries on the scriptures, their theological writings, expounding the faith, because that's going to be much better for you than if you get a 4-year degree or 3-year degree from Emory or St. Vladimir's or something like that, where you're going to come out believing the Old Testament was written by in the 4th century BC, and it was all just made up Hebrew folklore. I mean, for example, there was Paul Tarazzi. He may be retired, but I think he's emeritus professor up in St. Vladimir's, and he was the one that basically said that only Paul understood the true gospel, and none of the apostles did, and he believes Isaiah was written by 3 different people, and you can't trust any of the Old Testament narratives. I mean, that's what you're going to get in a mainstream seminary, is basically blasphemy and heresy. integrity of the scriptures. They attack the integrity of the lives of the saints. They, instead of just saying, well, there might be discrepancies in manuscripts or blah, 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 they just go right out, attack everything about the fathers. And that's how you get this whole thing they had in Oxford recently, where Callistus Ware, this great academic, was at this like gay conference. Exactly. I don't know if you saw that.
Everyone has seen that.
That kind of stuff produces, by the way.
Exactly.
I mean, the last time you had quasi-scholastic type education, orthodoxy, and actually could produce something good, it was like pre-revolutionary Russia. But even then, there were problems of dryness as opposed to heresy. It wasn't anything heretical. People kind of criticized that education because they thought it was just overly dry. I mean, it was still producing pretty good priests, considering what we have today in terms of world orthodoxy. So,
I'm looking here now, just before we get to, because I want to touch on to that. Let me see here. Do you guys consider Father Seraphim Rose a church father? I asked because I read an article on Ortho Christian that argued it was wrong to limit church father membership to the first 8 centuries. Well, no, absolutely. The idea of the patristic period ending in the 9th century is Roman Catholic. Now, that's not to say that we automatically recognize Father Seraphim Rose as a church father. Me personally, I'm fairly close to it. His writings were largely they were largely necessary in the world of the Orthodox convert century. His writings on creation, his writings on the religion of the future are extremely relevant to our age, but they do touch through the patristic standard. It's definitely, I'd say there's an argument that he should be regarded among them.
I agree.
Doodle Bob wrote, St. Photius Seminary, I've heard good things about. I had to actually look that up. I guess that's in Etna.
St. Photius, yes, that's what I'm talking about.
That one's not, it's not, that it looks like it's not bad. I remember that they had a full seminary. I remember that they used to have an institute and you had to get a BA from somewhere else. But it doesn't.
I think this only offers graduate degrees. I think. I don't.
No. This offers. I just checked that. It actually offers bachelor's. Okay. To high school graduates. So that was exactly what I thought too, Father. But apparently this is new.
I would always recommend calling, before going to some place like that, to call like the directors and the people who are professors there and talk to them. What do they believe? Just to be sure that you're not going to go there and they're going to say crazy stuff like, Augustine's not really a saint and the West apostatized.
That's true, and Romanitas and all that stuff. Yeah.
I would still recommend doing that because in Orthodoxy, there has been subtle forms of renovationism, or it's not so subtle, that have gone in the guise of being supposedly the most extreme and correct version of something, which can damage people in a whole different way than the left-wing renovationism that you see like in the St. Sergius Institute or out of the Greek Archdiocese or something like that.
Well, we can't really, I see people are making.
I'm not attacking. Forgive. I'm not saying that's actually going on in St. Photius. I'm just saying my initial thing is just to call. I mean, if somebody wanted to, like, we're going to have people coming to the monastery here from some of our missions that are going to hopefully be here. Some of them are going to be here for theological training. And, I've talked to them beforehand so they know what they're getting into and what I'm going to teach them and what I'm going to instruct them in. All right. Because I want them to be aware of it, the different situation. But that's, the method I told you about of going through the whole church fathers and, going to services. That's basically how I train people when I do have the chance to train people in, and now it's not a formal sense, but, we read through that. I try to out loud when I have people that are here. I out loud through the church fathers, and dealing with that. So
let's see here. People are noting various theologians of YouTube, such as Saint Shade Dyer, the theologian, Earl, the theologian. We can't forget Saint Lazar Pahalo, the theologian. He actually writes he's a theologian on the back of his books.
I remember when I was 17 and first looking into Orthodoxy, I ran into the anti-toll house stuff. I mean, and then I guess I wrote to some of them, and I got a week later, I got 40 books in the mail in this big box. Father Michael Askell stuff, stuff written by Blazer Pahalo, and et cetera, et cetera. And it was really, to be initially, it was like, oh, this is Orthodox, but there was really off-putting stuff in there, and especially when they would refer to a saint they agreed with, they call him Saint so-and-so. But then if there was suddenly Saint John Chrysostom said something they didn't like or they thought was crypto-Gnostic, it would suddenly be Bishop of Constantinople said this. Weird. So then I gradually, obviously moved out of that as I began to actually read the Church Fathers instead of just listening to people tell me this is what the Church Father says, and if you disagree with Romanides, then you don't understand the Church Fathers. Disagree with Romanides and understand, et cetera,
Let's see, what else have we got here? Ramble says, how do you tell a priest he's teaching heretical doctrines without being prideful or disobedient or rude? Oh, I don't. Well, first off, I would do it quietly. Do it at coffee hour. Let's see.
One simple way is to. Well, I mean, it depends. If he's like in the sermon, if he says something like "Our Lady was not Mother of God" in the sermon, I'd make a stink right there. Blatant like that, I would actually say something right there. All right, because that's in fact what the people did when Nestorius's representatives who were preaching in the I guess it was the old Church of Holy Wisdom or whatever began. It was like Dorotheus the bishop said the Virgin was not Theotokos, and it caused immediately people began to say stuff. And an uproar happened and they walked out. If it's something that's like he made a mistake and maybe he didn't emphasize something correctly, or I hate to use the word subtle heresy because I don't want to be accused of creating some kind of system or whatever. And you might, to him privately.
You can write him a letter or an email.
I mean, if he's still like, oh, this is, he still gets angry at you, and then I would talk to the bishop.
It's just time to go. The point is,
the final thing to do is to talk to the bishop before you leave, because ultimately the bishop has to deal with it. And if the bishop doesn't deal with it, then you as a layman, I would simply not go to the parish anymore.
The point is, no, I was just going to say there has to be a limit, because you have to realize that as a layperson, technically the priest sometimes will have the attitude of having power over you. So eventually, if he's teaching falsehood, if his bishop accepts that he's teaching falsehood, it's time to just find another priest and bishop. Do you feel acceptance, son of Seth? Do you feel acceptance of evolution and orthodoxy is dangerous / heretical? Why are there many Orthodox who accept it in churches? I think a lot of it is just basically it's conditioned into our society. Grade school onward to television programming. It's just not only accepted, it's almost worshipped.
Remember, this was the question they had with Bishop Alexander Millant and some of the Roquefort people around 2000. I don't know if you know the controversy about that. Bishop Alexander Millant, who was, I think, Bishop in Buenos Aires, he published a lot of stuff where he basically taught what we might call old earth creationism. Joseph.
What?
Bishop Alexander Millant taught what was called old earth creationism.
Oh, okay.
Like if you read the Law of God, he kind of implies some stuff like old earth creationism.
You're still trying to merge it to the
what they would say. In fact, I hear this from people that Adam and Eve were real people, and that death did come from that, but that maybe the earth was older, or maybe the creation date is actually from the time of the creation of Adam, and that way, like, people can avoid the problems of Darwinism, sense of evolution, of transmutation of species and things like that.
Right.
But it's kind of like a halfway. Still don't think it's consistent. Though people have made arguments talking about this in the age of the solar system or the age of the stars. The stars supposedly billions of light years away, but then again, how do we know time didn't run faster in some parts of the universe than it did on Earth?
time dilation and so on and so forth.
But
And I think that I think that ultimately, I think the best
point
way
is,
to put it is
even somebody who says, well, or even someone who believes in Earth creationism, the thing is they're at least trying to take things seriously. They're not just saying it's all a mythology and it never existed. I mean, I think they're emphasizing the wrong things, but I've encountered kind of gradually moved. Like I kind of believe that years and years and years ago, like I was like 18, and then I gradually moved to young Earth creationism when I began to look at this situation more in depth. So I mean, I knew Father Seraphim Rose dealt with people who were in Rokor that kind of believed in like some kind of modified form of theistic evolution, or even which is kind of different.
The Romanedians and the Calamari,
for example, believed in theistic evolution. The HTM taught that.
Or they were Hockney, yeah.
Rokor, I mean, they can still say Adam and Eve existed, and they will all generally acknowledge that, but there's still kind of like that come about even with theistic evolution stuff, even if you put all these caveats into it. So, I mean, I know some groups like Artok have like anathema against Darwinism. That might be the proper way to move into things, basically solve the issue. But so I don't think I think young Earth creationism is simply the correct view, and there are explanations if people actually look at the fathers and look at science too that can answer all these questions. So,
just the greater need: more true Orthodox Christian lay people or true Orthodox clergy? But with more true Orthodox Christians, lay people or clergy, they're both necessary. The church isn't one or the other.
You need lay people to become clergy.
Exactly. Lay people give birth to clergy.
You just can't create clergy out of nothing. I mean, they got to become
exactly. Both. Let's see here. Marco says there's pressure coming down from the Serbian Orthodox Church and Canada leadership to force parish priests to hold liturgy in English, even though 95+% are native Serbian speakers.
They have it in Slavonic to begin with, so I mean, it's not like it's in vernacular.
The question is, do they speak English? I mean, the whole point is, what you don't want to do is you don't want to ossify the church. Like I always get nuts whenever somebody wants to do Western Rite and Latin, and forgive me, I know there's some people who like that, but it drives me nuts. Not that I don't read Latin, I do, and I think the Latin is very beautiful. I also think that 95% of people who walk into a church and hear Latin are not going to understand a word that's being said. I'm not saying that that's the case with, in this particular case, because you're mentioning that they're native Serbian speakers, even though they're using Slavonic. But more importantly, people can be native Serbian speakers and still speak in English. The question is the other reasoning, which you mentioned, that you've noticed kind of people want to keep it Serbian, and the leadership's arguments go along with the lines of making the church more inclusive. Should theoretically be inclusive if it is, the church. It should be welcoming to everyone who wants to become a Christian. But if you mean by inclusiveness political correctness or bringing in the gays or something, then no, of course we can't accept that. But should, stay as the bulwark of language in classes for that if you really want to preserve the culture, but you don't have to force it in the service.
Well, it's an interesting, discussion, because among all the Slavic Orthodox traditionally, they do not do services until maybe some of the Ukrainians or whatever in the 1920s. But as a rule, they have not done services in their vernacular languages. They do it in Church Slavonic, which is in fact a modified form of old Bulgarian or something like that, old Macedonian or whatever. And I do not. Now, I don't know if you agree or not, but average Russian, I mean, can they read Church Slavonic and have what is their comprehension level? 50%, 60%?
I'd say it's closer. It's around 40-50, and the reason why is it's the Shakespeare problem. There are, if you go to if you go to Russian churches in Russia and they're doing Church Slavonic, they have booklets, handy hints on how to read Church Slavonic and how to understand what you're hearing, because you can kind of pick up on some of it. And if you're studying it backwards, you study the Slavonic first and then you go to the Russian, you can see the roots in the same way you can see that with Latin and Spanish or Italian, so on and so forth. But the point is, for your average Russian, it's like listening to Shakespeare. you're listening to it.
Are we sure it's that close? Because I mean,
it's a little further out, but you have to realize, Father. I'm not trying to puff you up here, but you're a pretty smart guy. But a lot of Americans can't read Shakespeare.
Because Shakespeare is basically similar to the Elizabethan King James,
yes,
right?
But,
to
some degree,
it's a little bit more prosaic, I guess, intentionally.
A little more guttural at times. But the point is, if you're hearing that read out loud, reading it sounds radically different.
To be closer to Chaucer or something like that than it would be to Shakespeare.
Maybe
that's
closer. A little. We'll go in between Shakespeare and Chaucer. It is, but that's the level where you're at. People, if they really pay attention, can understand it.
The other issue is that in Romania and the Vlach areas, ancient Wallachia, etc. They did not. They were a Latin-speaking, Romance-speaking language people. Right? Romanians are okay, but from the 10th century or so until basically the 1690s, until St. Paisius Velikoski began to change it, the Romanians were made to use Church Slavonic partially because the Bulgarians dominated the hierarchy, and they enforced Church Slavonic. So, interestingly, the Romanians, who basically their language. In fact, it's interesting. I was reading a chronicle somewhere. It was from like a Byzantine chronicle from the 11th century, and he was describing the Vlachs, which is what we call the Romanians today, being very negative about. He says their language is like a version of Italian, but much more impossible to understand and corrupted, and had a very discriminatory attitude. But it's kind of interesting that when St. Paisius Velikoski, who was from Ukraine, Athos, and he settled at the invitation of one of the boyars in, I can't remember, where was it in Romania he settled, the monastery he set up. But when he did that, one of the things he began to do was actually translate the Slavonic services into Romanian for Romanian people. If you're Romanian, Serbian or Bulgarian or Russian, your language is related to Slavonic, to a good degree, almost like Latin and medieval Spanish or Latin and medieval Italian or whatever. But if you're a Romanian language, the relation you have to Slavonic is kind of almost like Irish.
This is
they have a common ancestor, but it's a problematic issue. But St. Paisius began to chant. That was why they say, this is why, not to cut you off, but why they say, I've heard people say that the Romanians actually, of all the kind of Eastern European peoples, because their liturgy was translated around the year 1700, very little to no problems with comprehending what's actually being said. Anyway, go ahead.
Later. Well, Marco, I think you're establishing my point here, because you said, yes, we use Church Slavonic, but if you are a strong Serbian speaker who attends church regularly and picks up a Slavonic Serbian translation, then you can understand the whole service easily. And I would agree, if you do all of those things, you can probably understand it. My point is that a lot of people, and I assume a lot of Serbians, do not do all of those things, and therefore it would be incomprehensible to them. What I'm saying is that, yes, if you put the effort into it, whether it's in Old English or it's, Latin roots, or if you're doing it in Church Slavonic, and somebody who reads that booklet in a Russian church will pick up the Slavonic very easily if he has the means and desire to do it. But if he doesn't, it's just going to sound confusing to him. Now, the question
why don't they bring in two priests, one to do a Slavonic liturgy, another to do an English language liturgy?
I think he's saying that he's saying that that it's a subtle attempt to liberalize the Serbians in Canada. It is very possible. They're always doing stuff like that, so it doesn't surprise me if that's the case. Points out the KGV is awesome. The Douay Reams and Breton Septuagint are pretty good also.
There's also the old pre-Challoner Douay Reams, which is difficult to get a hold of.
Original Douay Reams.
What was it? Wiseman or Mann or whatever in the 19th century said it's an abuse to call the Douay Reams the current Challoner revision. He said it's abuse to call it the Douay Reams because Challoner basically updated it to 1730s English.
Yeah, but a lot of it was just spelling.
Well, no, some cases no, because I'll give you an example. Look in the Challoner. I'm not attacking the. He's just updating pronunciations and words and things too. But for example, the nominative plural pronoun ye the King James and in the old Douay-Rheims is very rarely, was basically almost completely eliminated from the Challoner revision. You will find it a few places, but he uses the U indiscriminately.
Okay, so that's fair. I didn't even realize that.
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, he still continues the other forms of vowel, the etc. And what have you. And my point is that my view is that the Douay-Rheims, the Challoner revision, is like more modern than the King James in terms of understandability. At least that's how I perceive it. It's still on that cusp of like from the Elizabethan to English to going into something else.
Victorian English, yeah.
Still pretty good English, I think. I have no problem with it. So, especially the Psalter, the Douay-Rheims Psalter is in fact just simply the Latin Psalter. And that's because St. Jerome, even though he made his own translation from some Hebrew text, no one really accepted it. So when you look at the Douay-Rheims Psalter, it's almost exactly the same as like the HTM Psalter, the Latin translation of the Septuagint Psalter.
And this isn't now. Rambles writes, "Modern English is lame. I want the ye old English, sire." that's good. And a lot of people do like it, and I think it's good to we preserve it.
I think it's important simply because, at least if you retain some of these old distinctive pronouns, you can actually literally translate parts of the Greek, talking about someone in the singular as opposed to the indiscriminate you. That's just how I feel about it. So, it's not like I can't believe people cannot understand. If people cannot understand King James English, I do not know what has happened to the mind.
You have to realize that society has oversimplified the language.
Look at some of these Bible translations. People are saying they can't even understand the Revised Standard Version, and that was made like in 1890. I mean, eventually, what do they want? They want They want some kind of weird New Living Bible and taking out the gender pronoun. I mean, that seems where some of this is going. So, okay.
Now, what's it called? Now, Marco points out that they're still pushing it. The solution of two services was put forth by the defenders of Serbian usage, and to avoid exposing themselves to leadership, consented to the solution, only to stop the two services, go back to service, and push again for English. That is why many of us have grown very suspicious. Okay, so let me see if I understand this correctly. They're creating an English service nobody goes to. It sounds to me like, they want to modernize things in spite of the people. No sense.
It's a top-down reform movement.
It's not healthy.
I agree with him now. If he says they created one English liturgy, and then they allow a Slavonic liturgy, and then they consent to that. That was the proposal. And then eventually they're like, we're just going to get rid of the Slavonic liturgy anyway, even though we agree to it. That means they were never being the people in charge were being sincere to begin with.
Oh yeah,
their motive. So yeah,
probably. Rambles asks, any books you recommend for a 17-year-old Orthodox convert? I said The Way of a Pilgrim, which is good. I recommend The Indication of the Way into the Kingdom of Heaven, as well as
Saint Tikhon or Saint Innocent.
And Saint Tikhon's, Journey to Heaven, even though it is not a complete translation of the Russian, it's actually a very small sliver of it. Is also excellent. Those are.
I like Saint Theophan the Recluse's The Way of Salvation. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Yeah, that's also.
That was one of the first books I read right after being baptized. I know people are like, "Oh, it's too," but I felt it was wonderful. It was great. I mean, he was very. I have to read it again, but I read it when I was, a few months after I was baptized, and it helped me a whole lot.
Let me see here. Now, what's it called? Doodle Bob asks for a copy of Where Can I Find Russia's Catacomb Saints?
I can give you a PDF. I can give you a PDF link right now.
PDF link right here, Father. Hold on. Just there you go.
There's this Orthodox Australia site that has it on their PDF site.
I found this Church Today Rus, and it looks like it's an actual scan of the book. So it's
because in some of the
48 pages.
Yeah, because the old book, because Platina has in the past, supposedly, I've been told this, I've not read any of the new edition, but supposedly people have said the newer editions they've tried to print in the past 15 or 20 years have removed problematic sections.
They've never reprinted Russia's Catacomb
They
Saints.
didn't? Okay, well, no, okay, good. That's
and
good.
This one is the edition I just printed is from 82. It has all the old.
You can't reprint
data
it.
in it.
Platina currently where they are cannot reprint that book because of what it says. I mean, do they sell the book even at Jordanville anymore?
No, they don't. It's at this point it's a collector's item. And then on the Remnant Roquor blog, I had a copy of it, but I thought they were going to take it down because Platina threatened them or something like that. So it's good that they still have it.
The PDF version is what I got. So
the PDF version, which is it's the full page, the original text. Let's see here. Have we got any other questions? No, it's in a it's in a PDF. Okay, that's good. Well, that's good. We need the key thing is that if we have it in more places, the book won't go away, which is what Platina and after their attempted union.
I'm putting a link in the questions section on the is to ostraka.org.
Okay.
They kind of have the old version. That's the one. That site, if you go to that site, Roca Australia, they actually have a lot of interesting old PDF files from the 80s and 70s and 80s.
In any case, so there's a lot of places.
Rambles asks the question on the Discord. He says, Father Enoch, do you have any more thoughts on St. Procopius of Sazava and the Slavonic Mass that you didn't address in the casual chat room? No, I think I really said everything. Basically, when St. Procopius of Sazava died a year before the schism, he was greatly venerated in Bohemia, which is modern-day area of Czechia. However, during the Gregorian Reform, his disciples and the proponents of the Slavonic Mass, Slavonic Byzantine or Slavonic Roman, were heavily persecuted. Supposedly there's a claim that some of his disciples were later allowed to return, like a few years later. It seems that some of the Slavonic clergy in Bohemia, they were allowed to stay in Tiniac for up to 1097, and then they were tried for heresy by basically the acolytes of Urban II or something like that. And there's evidence that a lot of them simply just had to flee into Russia.
That's good questions. Doodle Bob asks, is Platina taken over by the MP? And Rambles asks, someone on the Discord said Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future was edited. It is very possible they did reprint Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. Try to get an older edition of that one. Platina was actually originally
now, I believe,
in Patriarchate, not the Moscow Patriarchate. Yeah, since then they've been kind of had their hands tied with what they can print and whatnot, and they're trying to rose into like a World Orthodox apologist. This is another thing that I found a disturbing trend you mentioned earlier, Father, which is because of becomes popular among World Orthodox. I don't think that necessarily means that that's a bad thing. You mentioned Saint John Maximovich, and I was a little bit concerned that there are some true Orthodox who are referring to him simply as Archbishop John Maximovich. That bothers
Bishop John. I've actually some of them have been saying Bishop John Maximovich. They demoted him from being Archbishop even. So
I mean, that's kind of
back to the fact that, remember, Metropolitan Vitali did not want to glorify St. John Maximovich, and he kind of consented and acknowledged this is what, ostensibly he had a change of heart. But counter people on the old NSTU forums, as I don't know if here or whatever, email people would send me. Mansonville type. I mean, I don't want to get in jurisdiction, but there were some of them were associated with that to have a very negative view about St. John Maximovich, like he wasn't a real saint, and this was something that was of impetus for the apostasy of Roquor to the MP. Because people were bringing up, because remember in the 90s and then in the early 2000s, people were saying, I've heard this from MP priests. They were trying to throw this thing into the face of true Orthodox, where they were claiming St. John Maximovich always commemorated, always recognized the patriarch of so-called patriarch of Moscow, Alexei I. And I don't know if we mentioned this in a previous broadcast, but they brought up John was in China. There was like a 6-month period in which we do think he did in fact commemorate.
Yeah, but he repented of it to the Synod.
Well, what happened is, remember, he and others honestly thought there had been some sort of change in Russia, and there's free. In fact, Metropolitan Chrysostomus of Florina, who was a saint, the Matthewites always bring this up about him, that he even apparently, endorsed the Moscow Patriarchate for like 8 months or a year, because he thought it was like, oh, they honestly, maybe they really are free, and all this stuff is coming back. But after World War II ends, and eventually CIA then was no longer had to be friendly to the Soviet Union or the American intelligence, not CIA. So then they could start actually allowing real truth to come out, not because they were interested in truth, but because it was politically convenient. So then people began to discover the truth about the Moscow Patriarchate, and so people kind of turned against it. I think other people try to say because St. John Maximovich didn't cross all the T's and dot all the I's by claiming the ecumenical patriarchate and the Romanians and the Serbs and were all graceless and they had lost grace because he wasn't supposedly have that opinion in the 60s, or it's dangerous to accept him. Well, if that's the criteria that you could then Philaret of New York, St. Philaret, and maybe a few other Roquefort bishops, not all of them held the strict no grace line for all the patriarchates either. Kind of creating a narrower and narrower circle based upon conclusions true Orthodox had to come to when they began to analyze things decades after the fact, and trying to superimpose that upon people 50 or 60 years ago who were in a much earlier stage of the state of apostasy. Also bring up stuff about supposedly St. John. They bring up the whole prelist argument that he was in prelist, and supposedly there was one case in which St. John, when they were taking him to court, St. John was asked by one of the, I can't remember the exact account, where there was someone in the church who was like, well, are we going to win this court case, or are we going to, or is the parish council going to take you to court or something? And St. John said, well, I'm going to pray about it. And he comes back and he says, I prayed about it and I believe God's going to help us and we're not going to be going to court. And then, like the next day, they went to court, and their argument is, well, St. John was in prelist because if he was a true saint, he would have known. He would have known he wasn't going to be going to court. Saints aren't going to be 100% infallible or going to be seers of the future 100% of the time. I don't see how St. John Maximovich goes, lights a candle, he prays, and he believes that, he somehow thinks, God's going to not take him to court. That's just someone's wrong about something. They honestly maybe thought. I don't see that as like, they're in demonic prelist or something like that. But then again, St. John Maximovich is kind of someone that's always been attacked. It's never been a point in which people have not somehow attacked him, even if they accept him as saint. There's always been sly attacks on him and ways to discredit him by saying he was a saint, but he made a lot of mistakes. I've heard that before, mostly because he supported the Western Rite, and they have to find some way to debunk him because of that. All right, so it's just, I think, how the saints, no one, as the apostle says, who desires to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will not somehow suffer persecution. And if they're going to basically drag St. John Maximovich to the mud and lie him and claim he said you could give communion to Uniate, or you could commit the Moscow Patriarchate was good, or that he was an ecumenist, or that they can claim all the things they want about him. But ultimately, I believe it's just lies. What do you think, Father?
I agree. I think that what's happening, and unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why not be insular, because what happens is the more insular you get, the more you have to throw out, and eventually you start throwing out orthodoxy.
Yes, that's what happens with like groups like the Hawk and the so-called right-wing renovationists. They go into that mentality. Yeah,
it's a shame.
I think we've been going for about 80 minutes. I think maybe we should unless we have any more questions.
And so basically, if there aren't any other questions, we'll wait for a minute or two. If there are no and we'll shut it down in about 2 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, we covered a bunch of things except the stuff in the title because we covered that beforehand, and I'll probably change the title anyway. Let's see, levitation isn't orthodox, is it?
Levitation? What do they mean? I mean, what?
Wants you to levitate, you're going to levitate. It's kind of that simple. It's not like you don't get it as like a superpower or something. I don't like. It's not like St. John was flying around like Superman. It's that's just, if it happens, it happens. There are certain things that like if a person is trying to levitate of their mystical type prayers, then yeah, that's wrong. That's a sin. But if a person is levitating because the Holy Spirit moves them up, I mean,
when Saint Dunstan was dying, and he was like his body, he was saying he was being taken. They saw this great light, and his body was beginning to lift from the bed, and he was saying, and they had to hold his body down, and that was a sign that he was, the angels were so quick to take him to heaven. He was dying. I don't think there was any account of him like levitating, like flying around or anything. He was alive, but he was supposed to symbolize he was so holy, take him to heaven even before his soul has left his body. So.
Okay, so we got a question. So, which church in Russia is legitimate? Well,
We can say what's not legitimate.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. The churches in Russia were historically organized by Ukaz 362 of Patriarch Saint Tikhon. So, in fact, none of them actually require, I guess you could say, reunite until they're in a situation where such peace can be restored. So, if you're going to a Roak church, if you're going to or church that's in Russia, if you're going to an Artok church, going to one of our churches in Russia under the TOC under Metropolitan Seraphim, if you're going to a Seraphimo Genedite church, going to the church, if you're going to, again, if you're going to even I'd say even non-commemorators in Russia are probably safe at this point. But the point is, what's not safe is the regular plain old Moscow Patriarchate, which is a state tool. Rambles has one last question. Okay. For it.
No, I still wouldn't recommend going to the non-commemorators because they attack true orthodoxy a whole lot.
Depends on the non-commemorators.
Yeah, but the problem is that even if they're non-commemorators, they theoretically need to unite with true orthodoxy in some way. They still need to do that.
That's why the question becomes then they haven't figured that out yet.
Well, yeah, but so our job needs to be to encourage them to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, I'm saying if a person is in the Moscow Patriarchate, then they should at least go there.
I guess you can say that's better than going to where they are, I suppose. But I don't want to. I do want to be careful about encouraging that.
You should not. Okay, now, do you call a deacon father? Well, you can. It's
proper. You're supposed to call a deacon father. Deacons and priests are called father.
Yeah. I mean, I don't make a big deal about
monks
it.
Monks are called. A monk who is not even ordained a reader is called father. The monastic culture.
Doodlebug says
different than in the Roman Catholic understanding, but
should I avoid Roak? No. If you avoid Roak, and I would say no, you shouldn't.
If it's the real Roak, not the Gregory Laurier Roak.
Right. If it's under Metropolitan Theodore, it's fine. Cults that call themselves Roak occasionally, like the Gregory of Colorado people and the Gregory Laurier people, who are name worshipping heretics, stay away from them. They're frauds and they don't have real succession. As for the real Roak, the one under Metropolitan Valentine, not Valentine, but Theodore of Sustal and Vladimir churches, yeah, those are fine. I don't think.
Okay.
I think that covers everything. And so if no one has any more questions, we're going to call it a day. Shut down. Father, benedicite.